and the Fire. This is a fairy tale that I wrote after the incident. Fairy and the Fire, 2014. There once was a fairy who loved to explore the spirits in the woods. One day she came upon a feather, and it gave her strength. From it she gained in her heart the ability to explore farther into the woods than she could ever go. With every step it became darker, but she stepped forward anyway. As the light dissolved and the pitch drew to the purest black, it started to snow. The forest finally broke into a clearing in too short of a time. There was nothing but snow. Fairy meant to march forward into the white wilderness. Eventually, white was broken by red. She followed the bloody footprints in the snow. The blood increased as she walked into pools of blood. 3 dead deer lay ahead, a mother and 2 fawn. In the center of the bodies was a demon covered in black silk, draining the bodies that laid at her feet. Though her belly was full of blood and her mouth covered, her thirst was endless, for it quenched more than her body. She drank ravenously until she spotted Fairy, staring at her through the clearing. As their eyes met, Fairy fled, taking to the woods as quickly as she could, and in a panic she ran straight into a tree. But this was no ordinary tree. Though his hair did have dirt and leaves, he moved without roots as he spoke, and with eyes of the fawn, a face of a man, and legs of a horse, they found each other, Fairy and fawn. These woods were his home, and he pulled her to safety as they dashed along the trail. They reached his cabin, which was tucked into the hillside. Once they were safely inside, he dressed her wounds. The ice had burnt her feet, and he wrapped them with care. She began to feel warm. When he asked her what had scared her, she explained about the 3 deer and the demon and the look in the beast's eyes as it drank. He told her that he had never seen the beast, but that many creatures in these woods did eat from the deer, himself included. Fairies didn't eat animals where she came from, but he was so beautiful that she thought maybe it wasn't that bad. And he laughed at her inexperience and cooked up some fish, and she sipped on rosehip tea, and they grew tired. They both fell asleep in the warmth of the fire and each other. And as they slept, the cabin changed from house to home. In the morning she awoke to find that her little fawn was not beside her. Instead, he was outside talking to a maiden adorned in fine black silk. When he saw Fairy at the door, he welcomed her over, and Fairy reached out her hand to shake Maiden's hand, and as their hands clasped, Fairy suddenly felt a coldness that reminded her of the blood in the snow. Her feet began to hurt as she thought of this. The beast and the lady were one and the same, but they looked so different. Fairy pulled her back, and as she did so, she saw Maiden sneer in recognition. She smiled and promised to come back and visit Fawn in the spring, and as she parted, she gently stroked his beard. As the cabin door closed, Fairy grew frantic about what she had just seen and pleaded with Fawn to stay away from such dangers. The Fawn laughed. He knew a way around danger in these woods, he said. He pet her long golden hair as he soothed her back into the embrace of the warm fire. He fell asleep, and as he slept, Fairy stared deep into the fire and grew very sad indeed. The darkness within the flame showed her unfavorable visions. She knew that if Fawn chose only to see the light, that he'd miss the shadows, and in doing so would welcome them in. As long as he couldn't see, he'd always be close to the blood and the snow. She also knew she couldn't protect him, and at this, she wept through the night. Fairy loved her fawn, whose eyes, she felt, held unrealized nobility, and at this feared the changing of the seasons. But inevitably spring came, and as the ice melted, the roads opened again, and Fairy knew the maiden would return soon. The closer the day came, the more sad Fairy grew. Fawn saw her sadness and had been warned by it, asking her not to speak of the visions of the fire whose embrace she had not felt since that night. Fawn started to hate listening to her cry while he was sleeping, and in his dreams returned to running through the woods. One night Fairy came back home and looked in the window to find Fawn and Maiden sitting by the fire. She filled their glasses with the blood of the deer, and they clinked glasses as they drank. As he drank, his face went cold, and his eyes turned hollow and white. An orb of light came out from his throat and floated between his lips. It sat there, spinning, though he was still frozen. Fairy looked at his face, but he didn't look like the fawn. He looked deflated and removed. Fairy ran into the wood, shouting to the trees for help, but wait was their only reply. "I can't wait, his light. What if he loses his light?" cried Fairy. The woods reassured. He can only lose his light if he chooses to lose his light. He's in another place now, another set of woods that only he knows the way to and from. You cannot find him. He is gone, little Fairy. You must let him go. Fairy refused to listen and ran back to the direction of the cabin, but it wasn't there. Nothing was. And as she ran and ran, she couldn't find him. But everything started to look familiar. She realized she was back now, back in her own woods. She had no idea for how long she had been gone. She ran into her cabin and opened the door. Everything was gone. Only scraps remained, and so she sat alone in silence, asking for help. It grew dark. Fairy didn't move. She couldn't. And once again she sat with the dark for farther than she ever thought she could go. The night's time passed with the slowness of a season, and in the silent cold of darkness, her chilled breath passed her hollow heart and renewed itself. Giving faith to the light, she got up and built a fire with the scraps that remained. And as she warmed herself, she stared into its heart and believed, feather in hand, that no matter what woods he chose, that he'd always have the light of fire in his heart. And in the heart of the fire, she'd always have him, the Fairy and the fawn.